Hi, I'm Jeff Feldhahn, and I've got a question for you. Have you ever felt confused by a woman? I know that everyone might be chuckling right now because we all have. Understanding the woman in our life, whether it's a wife, a girlfriend, or a daughter, can sometimes feel like trying to find our way through a deep wilderness without a clearly marked path to follow. I hike sections of the Appalachian Trail with some buddies a couple times a year, and I'm grateful that the path is clearly marked, because not having a clear sense of where to go, like how we feel sometimes with women, doesn't feel too good. We all dislike that feeling of being confused or frustrated and having absolutely no confidence that we know where we're going, but it doesn't have to be that way. My wife Shaunti and I have spent years researching how women think and feel, and have uncovered some really important, surprising truths that you need to know. Through this series, we're going to be cluing you into the ones that will make the biggest difference for you and teach you some skills to help you find the right path and stay on it once you've found it. Now, I'm pretty sure that for a number of you guys, the only reason you're watching this is that your wife is going through the 4 Women Only study and wanted you to do this one. Believe me, I understand. Talking about relationships, it's not our natural habitat. But since you're here, let me lay out for you what you've signed up for. First, we're going to be simple and quick with our sessions, with an emphasis on what to do when you feel lost in the wilderness. To me, learning stuff that's practical, doable, and can be easily remembered is one of the most important functions of this study. Second, there are 6 sessions, and with each session being roughly 10 minutes in length. You'll see both Shaunti and me talking, since it's actually the same material we use at our marriage conferences. So every now and then we might sound like we're talking to both men and women, even though in this study, it's just us guys in the room. Since we're going to be your tour guides for the world of women, let me tell you a little bit about us. We've got a slightly different background from most folks who teach about relationships. We're not marriage counselors or psychologists. We're analysts by training. Shaunti worked on Wall Street, and I'm an attorney who worked at one of those big New York law firms. But that gave us great background to do the research that led to the books and the series. Over the last 10 years, we conducted interviews, focus groups, and surveys with more than 10,000 men and women, including 5 nationally representative surveys. We've even conducted 3 additional studies of teenagers. So what we're going to be sharing with you isn't our opinion. That said, as we describe how women think, we are making some generalizations, and there are always exceptions. If 75% of women said one way, by definition, 25% didn't. Everyone's an individual. The key is to understand the woman in your life. And in learning how to understand the woman in your life, you'll likely have to unlearn some things. From the time we were kids, we develop ideas about how women are wired, and we don't realize that some of these assumptions are wrong. And on top of that, we've built all these habits in how we interact with women, how we respond to things a woman says, and so on. Our job is going to be to help you to know the real deal about how women think instead, and to know what to do in those situations. And unlike all those wilderness survival guys on TV that most us guys love to watch, you're going to learn some skills that you can actually remember and get a chance to use, most likely every day, since you probably interact with a woman every day. So hang on and enjoy the adventure as we jump into session 1.
It's not true that women can't be understood. The jokes about, God doesn't even understand women. It's just not. Each woman is different, and each woman may need something different, to hear something different, to be, shown something different. But it doesn't mean that she's impossible to understand.
I promise you, if you look hard enough, well, not even hard enough, if you just look and pay attention, you'll be able to find the answer and understand women.
And it may take some probing. I will tell you that. It might not be the first thing that comes out of my mouth. This afternoon, I was in kind of a not real good mood. I was real quiet. And the first time he asked me, what's wrong? I was like, oh, I'm just tired. I haven't slept well the last few nights. But then he started asking again, are you sure that's it? Are you sure there's nothing else going on? Then I was able to say, well, that's only part of it. And I was able to articulate the other things that were kind of going through my head at the same time. That made me feel like, okay, he cared enough to dig a little deeper, to ask some more probing questions. And there was a reason there, but if he just turned around and walked away, and said, let me know when you're done, you know, we wouldn't have been able to talk about it. And that was big.
And a lot of times in our conversations we've had, when I say nothing's wrong, it's really simply because my concern, my fear is that if I say what's really wrong, if I say what's troubling me, that his response is going to be exaggerated, that it's going to be a defensive response or a frustrated response. And so oftentimes I'll just think, I might as well not say anything.
Maybe he upset me. Maybe he said something and I didn't have it in me at the moment to say, hey, that hurt. And I'm sitting there just smarting over it. But if he would sit there and actually say, hey, honey, why are you so quiet all of a sudden? I would actually be able to explain to him and we could actually get something resolved.
Guys probably tend to think that we're playing games, but because we did back in high school. But that doesn't mean that we go through that our whole lives. They just have to learn to understand our thought process. And they will be able to understand us. I mean, it's simple. It's like math. There's always an answer. With us, there's always an answer. Always.
And the way we started the research on For Men Only is related to the first subject we're going to cover. When a book or a movie is successful, what's the next thing that they always want the author or movie producer to do? Write another, do a sequel. In addition, during the first year or two that Shaunti was out talking to women's groups about the For Women Only stuff, women would always come up to her and say, so, when are you going to even out the score and do the other side? So the publisher came and said, okay, we're going to do the For Men Only book. And Jeff, we really need you to do it with Shaunti. I was really hesitant. It wasn't having to do all the research that worried me. I'm a lawyer by training and know a little bit about analysis and how to process through certain difficult things, so that was okay. And I wasn't worried at all that we'd have fights or disagreements or anything like that because of it. It was something else. So one night when we were out to dinner with the publisher, I told him that I had some serious concerns. Shaunti looked at me and said, what is it that's really bugging you about doing this? I said, well, this book is a way for men to understand women, but I'm just not sure you guys can be understood.
And I said, excuse me?
I said, well, you know, you're kind of random.
I was like, what?
Well, I said, well, think about it. Every guy knows it's just like we're standing in front of some machine and we pull a lever today and we get a certain response. Tomorrow, at that same machine, we pull the lever and we get a totally different response. To us guys, that's random.
And I said, we are not random. If you are getting a different response, you're pulling a different lever or you're pulling it differently or something because we're not random.
So this book essentially became a giant research project to prove to Jeff that women are not random. And then I could share with guys the findings. So that's what the whole project was. That's what it really came down to, sitting in focus groups, doing surveys, taking in data, understanding it, and trying to figure it out. But even if I could be convinced that women could be understood, I still had a final big reservation before I agreed to do the book. And that was, even if we came up with some great stuff, would there be any guy at all who was going to read it? I mean, relationship books aren't the first thing that guys tend to pick up when they're in the bookstore. Before we wrote For Men Only, I had read only one relationship book in my life. And that was only because I had to in the premarital counseling in order to marry her.
Let me interrupt here and say that this is one reason we are really grateful for those of you men who are doing this couples study. We know this relationship discussion is not your natural habitat.
But as I was wondering whether any guy would buy and read For Men Only, something occurred to me. You see, I like gadgets, hardware, software, and stuff like that. And when I open them up out of the box, they always come with a manual. But do most guys ever read the manual? Nah, you just start pushing buttons until you get up and running. And that's often because the gadgets come with something else besides the big user manual. That little glossy foldout called the Quick Start Guide. So we decided to create a quick start guide for women. In 5 minutes, you can be at least up and running. And if you get into trouble, you can always consult the manual a little later. Because the truth is, when you're confused, if you do look hard enough, you'll find that there is a way to address almost every situation that confuses you. And now that leads us back into debunking the assumption that women are random, which I want to get into a bit more since this will set up the rest of our time in this study. Here's some context. Most of us guys, we like things to be predictable, things we can understand. For example, I love the little cheap refurbished computer we got for our kids. It was 99 bucks and it works great. They click the mouse and it works. They open the software and it works. They go to their school's math games site and it works. Well, up until a few weeks ago when it didn't work. Suddenly it froze up and acted really weird and finally locked them out altogether. I was pretty confused for a bit. Was it a virus? Had the hard drive stopped working? What happened? And that's the sort of alarming feeling we sometimes have in our relationship with a woman. Let's say she's upset, out of the blue, and we don't know why. It's that sense of, oh, something must be wrong, and where did that come from? Was it me? I don't know what I did. So it's that same confused feeling, but there is a big difference in how we handle it. You see, from the time that most of us were teenage boys, if we couldn't figure out a girl, if we were confused, if she was mad at us and we couldn't figure out why, we felt stupid. So we'd go into the locker room, nurse our wounds, and joke with the other confused guys and say, who can figure girls out anyway?
But can I interrupt here?
Sure.
Well, looking at this, what it seems to me is that at some point as a teenager, you guys began to assume that either there is no rhyme or reason behind our reactions, or if there is a reason, you'll never be able to understand it. Either way, it seems like you start to feel like you have no chance of getting it right. You're just confused. So you think the only sensible thing to do is to throw up your hands and try to ignore the problem. Or you think, I'll just leave her alone until she calms down. But what I think you're really hoping for in all those situations is that it will get better on its own.
Oh man, you bet we're hoping that it'll get better on its own. But here's the thing, guys. With a computer, you'd never do that. You'd work with it. You'd try to figure it out. With my kid's computer, I fiddled with it. I rebooted it. I went through a repair process. I did a virus check. That's what you'd do too. You'd never just ignore it like you sometimes do when you're confused by your wife or girlfriend. Why the difference? It can't be that you really love the computer and don't care about your wife. No, it's that you know with the computer, you know there's a reason things aren't working. And you assume it can be fixed. So you take a crack at it. Well, here's what I was shocked to discover during the whole research study. The same thing is true for women. We've done thousands of interviews and surveys and have found that when a woman seems completely baffling or you don't know why she's responding in a certain way, there is almost always a specific reason. And even more surprising, it's a reason that we see as legitimate once we understand it. Talking to women, and even teenage girls in focus groups, sometimes they'd describe some reaction that to a guy seems so unfair. But when we'd say, why did you do that? Suddenly, they'd list out this whole list of reasons, and we were like, oh, okay then. So, what do we do about all of this? We'll talk about that more next week, but here's the quick starting point. The first thing we have to do in every situation, every time we're confused, is assume two things. One, that there is a reason instead of assuming there isn't one. And two, that if we look hard enough and try to dig into what's going on, we'll be able to find it.
Those two things are so important. Over the next few weeks, you'll see those themes running under the surface in many of our topics. And you'll find it is very encouraging to realize that you don't have to be confused so much of the time.
So that is the good news we want you to take away from this first session together. Realize that you can understand her and make her happy, and the rest of the study will be showing you how.